Okay, thank you. I should kind of preface this by saying that I, unfortunately, after only 2 or 3 sessions of the 100 Hours project, I had to move up north, and so my knowledge of my object is perhaps even less than that of other contributors in relation to their objects. So what I really want to think about is how we can perhaps look repeatedly without knowing very much at all about what it is we're looking at. And as an early medievalist within a school of English, I'm used to working on the edge of things with only a fragmented knowledge of the manuscripts and the artefacts I purport to be an expert on. But I wondered what would happen when I pushed this unknowing further still to a yet more ancient time and to a faraway place and to a discipline I can't claim as my own. So I'd like to offer an ancient Egyptian oracular or ancestor bust as a limit case for the 100 Hours method. And that bust is over there in that white box, I believe for a limited time only. So I wanted to choose an object that had endured across a large expanse of time, one whose kind of unyielding materiality had allowed it to survive the processes of ageing. But I also yearned for a thing that conveyed a sense of life, a thing whose talkativeness would fill in the silences between my present and its past. So I settled on this wooden bust from the Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology. It was actually words that drew me to it first, its alternative names. So an ancestor bust suggested something with the power to cross the divide between life and death. An oracular bust hinted at an enigmatic thing that might speak to humans, for humans, even as a human. I didn't realise that I'd have another choice to make. In fact, 2 wooden busts were presented to me, so the same object, but rather different things. One had human facial features, an expression poised between eternal sleep and an awakening of consciousness. The other was anthropoid, but featureless, as expressive as a blank page. Part of me resisted choosing between the 2 of them. I wanted to keep them together as half-identical twins. They have the same duty to fulfil as mediators between the living and the dead, and yet their contrasting forms reshape the way that we conceive of human being, or being human. What does it mean to be awake or asleep, conscious or unconscious? How can we see and be seen, speak or be heard without eyes or a mouth? Anthropomorphism is in some circles a dirty word, a childish and simplistic practice. And of course, when dealing with a bit of wood in human form, I run the risk of anthropomorphizing an inanimate object. However, theorists like Jane Bennett are starting to question whether anthropomorphism is always anthropocentric. For Bennett, the rejection of anthropomorphism is often bound up with a kind of hubristic demand that only humans, and perhaps God, can bear any traces of creative agency. On the other hand, anthropomorphism can be an everyday tactic for cultivating the ability to discern the vitality of matter. In what ways is this bit of wood, mere wood, vital and vibrant? And how can I detect this without looking through the object, without turning it into a window onto human culture? Well, in our first meeting, we were invited to discover 100 histories in one object. But the challenge is to write 100 histories without depending upon or necessarily creating a hoard of knowledge, a collection of facts. So my initial response was to start with materiality, to try and grasp meaning through matter. As a literary scholar, I'm used to reading with my eyes, yet I was lucky enough to be able to touch the wooden ancestor busts. One was smaller, a little heavier, the other was taller but lighter. Both were potentially portable, but I got the impression that the lighter one might have been more personal. Was this why its features had been worn away? Perhaps someone had rubbed or caressed the face over and over till there was nothing left but an anonymous stare. I felt too some small cracks in the wood and was reminded of the sacredness of these things, a sacredness broken across time. But this sacredness is surely not evoked by materiality alone, so I'm drawn again to its role as a speaker. Imbued with the power of speech, the Egyptian bust points beyond itself, while insisting on the presence of the distant, the divine, the apparently dead. Surely wood can't speak for itself. Prosopopoia, from the Greek to make a face or a person, is a rhetorical device in which a person communicates by speaking as another creature or thing. For all my effort to engage with the material itself, it's still difficult to escape the fact that the life, the animacy, the voice of this wooden bust has always been bound up with human belief, and the enacting of those beliefs through ritual practice. Well, in the second meeting of the 100 Hours Project, we were introduced to an arcane order of the third bird, which involves ritual performances of sustained attention to objects. This workshop shifted the focus from the thing itself to the way that we as human beings encounter it. One part of the ritual entailed negation, whereby the viewer must refuse, unmake the work and the self. So as I enacted it, I came to understand that negation can involve staring or touching or thinking so intently that the object almost blurs or melts or dissolves and is thus uncreated. And indeed, when you face the face of the Egyptian bust for long enough, when you look so close that you forget what you're seeing, the thing sheds its anthropoid features. The same effect occurs when I move around it, staring at it from unusual angles. Recognisable lines and curves morph into indistinct yet smooth shapes. The third meeting brought home to me the everydayness of the Egyptian ancestor bust, a quotidian quality from which my own life is disconnected. Someone crafted it. How can I ever learn what it was like to feel this thing taking shape within my hands? Someone, perhaps many people, owned it and lived with it. What happens to an anthropoid bust when you walk past it, perhaps talk to it, day in and day out? Does it remain a mysterious and powerful guest, or does it become a more mundane member of the family? So gaps in belief must be taken into consideration here also. It's one thing to share working or living space with an ancestor bust, but another to wholeheartedly believe that it can speak, or that your ancestors can speak to you through it. In her introduction to Things That Talk, Lorraine Daston admits that sceptics will dismiss talk of talking things as metaphoric at best and at worst as a childish fantasy. She highlights the two opposing ways in which historically things have been said to talk for themselves. On the one hand, the idol that makes pronouncements to the devout consult it, but over which an air of fraud and folly hangs. In antiquity, it was suspected, often accepted, that a priest might hide in the temple basement and whisper through hidden tubes. On the other hand, the thing that self-evidently speaks the unquestionable truth, whether that's early modern legal codes where a bloody sword or pallor of a pregnant woman could be taken as proof, to Christian miracles that manifested themselves in water turned to wine. It's therefore wrong to assume that historical persons were any more naive when it came to the talkativeness of things. Yet clearly the perspectives of the past are always informed by varied and complex belief systems that may be impossible to replicate in 21st century London. There is still and always will be something missing, some knowledge or even truth I don't have access to. So what is this thing? An ancestor or oracular bust? But a thing always exceeds its name. It's now thought that Petrie was mistaken when referring to these ancestral busts as oracular, and yet for me it might be an illuminating mistake. For an oracle, from the Latin orare, to speak, is a kind of riddle, or a way of speaking in riddles. So it's the revelation of a partial truth, which always leaves gaps in meaning and contains the potential for deception. Of course, the most famous riddle of all time, posed by another Egyptian associated with death and the divine tomb and the temple, asks, what animal walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at midday, and 3 in the evening? Of course, this riddle was eventually solved by Oedipus when he resolved 3 different creatures into one human being, meaning that the Sphinx, itself a composite being, had little choice but to vanish from existence, leaping to its death from a high rock. Millions of people know this riddle, and yet, and more to the point, almost everyone knows the answer. And yet the riddle lives on, told and retold, solved and resolved again and again. Just as a thing always exceeds its name, there is more to a riddle than its solution. Riddles insist on obscurity while revealing underlying links in the fabric of creation. A raven is like a writing desk, teeth are white horses on a red hill, out of the eater comes something to eat. It's notable that the human face is only partially glimpsed, half hidden among the 100 hours objects. Where are the specific, individual, identifiable humans? They, we, are embedded within an assembly of meteorites, dodo bones, maps, whistles and 3-legged stools. So I'd suggest that as a face almost lost in the crowd, my enigmatic Egyptian bust is a riddle that reminds us that over time we too become another thing among things, composite creatures, sphinxes after all. We have the privilege of speaking now, but that privilege wanes with each breath expelled and with the passing of each solitary second. Our 100 hours are all but over. And what will become of us? Who will speak for us? Perhaps we should all hope to be anthropomorphized over the course of time.